If you think neighbors means polite smiles and minding your own business, think again. Here, neighbor means rivalry, sharp jabs, professional pride, and that tension you hate admitting you feel. She's all control and composure. He's pure provocation and confidence. And somehow neither of them can keep their distance. The elevator doors slid open on the 15th floor, and Phoebe Dalton's perfect Tuesday morning shattered into 1,000 irritating pieces. He was there. Brian Holloway leaned against the mirrored wall with that infuriating posture that screamed arrogance. One shoulder against the glass, arms crossed over his chest, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth that suggested he knew exactly how devastating he looked in that charcoal suit. The director of the nation's largest banking network, 35 years old and regularly featured in Forbes' most eligible bachelors list, watched her with those dark eyes that had probably made countless women forget their own names. Phoebe's stomach did something traitorous that she absolutely refused to acknowledge. "You have got to be kidding me," she muttered, her eyes landing on the stack of moving boxes piled beside him. "Welcome to the building, neighbor." His voice was deep, smooth, with just enough amusement to make her fingers curl into fists. "I do hope you won't make too much noise, or do uptight lawyers like you even know how to have fun." The memory slammed into her. 2 years ago, a charity gala, the women's bathroom door swinging open to reveal him pressed against some blonde in a sequined dress, his hand tangled in her hair. The woman's lipstick had been smeared across his jaw, and when Phoebe had frozen in shock, he'd had the absolute audacity to smirk and say, "Don't worry, counselor. I'm sure someone will help you loosen up eventually." She'd called him insufferable. He'd called her uptight. She'd vowed to never speak to him again, and now he lived in the penthouse, directly above the apartment she'd just bought. "Please tell me you're joking," Phoebe said, her professional composure cracking just enough to let the horror seep through. Brian pushed off the wall, moving with that predatory grace that probably served him well in boardrooms. "Moved in 3 days ago. Funny coincidence, isn't it?" He tilted his head, studying her in a way that made her skin prickle with awareness. If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. Although if I'd known my new neighbor would be you, I might have hung some soundproofing. You strike me as the type to complain about everything. "Only when there's something worth complaining about," she shot back, stepping into the elevator and jabbing the button for the ground floor with more force than necessary. He followed her in, of course he did, and the space immediately felt smaller. The scent of his cologne hit her, something expensive and woody that made her think of late nights and bad decisions. She pressed herself against the opposite wall, clutching her leather briefcase like a shield. "Running away already?" Brian's voice held laughter. "We haven't even had our first official neighborly dispute." "Give it time," Phoebe muttered. "I'm sure you'll do something obnoxious by this afternoon." The elevator began its descent, and she focused on the floor numbers ticking down. Anything to avoid looking at him, anything to ignore the way the overhead lights caught the strong line of his jaw, the slight curl to his dark hair that suggested he'd run his hands through it recently. She absolutely did not notice these things. "You know," Brian said conversationally, "most people would see this as an opportunity. Clear the air, start fresh, maybe even become friends." Phoebe's laugh was sharp. "Friends? With you?" She finally looked at him directly, raising one eyebrow. "I'd rather befriend a cactus. At least cacti are honest about being prickly." Ouch! But he was grinning now, clearly enjoying himself. "Tell me how you really feel, Phoebe." The casual use of her first name sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. She'd never heard him say it before. They'd only exchanged barbs at various industry events, always maintaining professional distance. Hearing it now in his low voice felt oddly intimate. "I feel," she said carefully, "that this building suddenly became significantly less appealing." The elevator dinged at the ground floor. Phoebe stepped out quickly, her heels clicking against the marble lobby floor. "See you around, neighbor," Brian called after her, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Try not to miss me too much." She didn't dignify that with a response, though her traitorous brain supplied several. Instead, she walked toward the exit with her head high, very aware that he was probably watching. Carlos, the building's longtime doorman, gave her a knowing look as she passed. "Good morning, Miss Dalton. I see you've met our newest resident." "Unfortunately," Phoebe muttered. Carlos's eyes twinkled with barely suppressed amusement. Mr. Holloway mentioned he was pleased to discover you'd be neighbors. Used the word fascinating 3 times. Phoebe stopped dead. He did not. Oh, but he did. Carlos opened the door for her. This is going to be more entertaining than my evening telenovelas. As Phoebe stepped into the crisp morning air, she realized with sinking certainty that Carlos was probably right. Brian Holloway living in the same building wasn't just inconvenient, it was going to be absolutely catastrophic. What Brian thought as the elevator doors closed, she looked good. Damn it, she looked really good. Brian watched the floor numbers climb back up, his mind still replaying the way Phoebe's eyes had flashed with annoyance, the slight flush that had colored her cheeks when he'd called her by her first name. 2 years. He'd been aware of her for 2 years, ever since that bathroom incident that she clearly still held against him. He should probably regret that night, but he couldn't quite manage it. Not when it had led to their first real conversation, even if it had mostly consisted of her telling him exactly what she thought of him in increasingly creative legal terminology. When his real estate agent had mentioned the new owner of apartment 15B was an attorney named Dalton, he'd known immediately. There was only one Phoebe Dalton in their social circles, brilliant, beautiful, and utterly immune to his charm, or at least she pretended to be. Brian had seen the way her breath had caught when he'd leaned against the elevator wall, had noticed how her knuckles had gone white around that briefcase handle. She wasn't as unaffected as she wanted to be. The elevator reached the penthouse, and Brian grabbed one of the moving boxes, a smile playing at his lips. Living above Phoebe Dalton was going to be interesting. Possibly maddening. Definitely worth the higher mortgage payment he'd negotiated to get this specific unit. He'd spent 2 years watching her at various events, always from a distance, noting the way she commanded a room with quiet confidence, the rare, genuine smile that transformed her entire face. He'd learned that she took her coffee black, wore minimal jewelry, and had a weakness for chocolate cake that she tried to hide. Now they were neighbors. The universe clearly had a sense of humor. Brian unpacked methodically, but his mind kept wandering downstairs. 15 floors and one beautiful, infuriating attorney between him and complete boredom. This was going to be fun. Day 3 of living below Brian Holloway, and Phoebe had developed a new strategy. Check the security camera feed in the lobby before calling the elevator. Carlos had been surprisingly cooperative about letting her peek at the monitor. This is ridiculous, Marina, her secretary and self-appointed life advisor, said over the phone. You're a 32-year-old successful attorney, and you're hiding from your neighbor like he's the plague. He's worse than the plague, Phoebe muttered, watching the small screen that showed an empty elevator. The plague doesn't smirk. Marina's tone dripped with skepticism. And does the plague also look like a GQ model in Italian suits? I wouldn't know. I don't pay attention to what he wears. Liar. You described his tie yesterday in unnecessary detail. Silk navy with silver threads matched his eyes perfectly. Your exact words. Phoebe felt heat creep up her neck. I was making a professional observation. Sure, honey, and I'm the Queen of England. Marina paused. Just admit he's attractive. It won't kill you. Attractive people can still be insufferable, Phoebe said firmly. Now I have to go. The elevator's clear. She ended the call before Marina could continue her analysis, grabbed her briefcase, and headed for the elevator. The doors opened smoothly, revealing exactly what she'd hoped for. Empty, blessed space. Phoebe stepped in, pressed the ground floor button, and allowed herself a small smile of victory, which died the instant a hand shot between the closing doors. Going down. Brian's voice preceded him into the elevator, followed by the man himself, looking unfairly good in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than her monthly car payment. His dark hair was slightly damp, suggesting a recent shower, and Phoebe absolutely did not think about that. You've got to be kidding me, she muttered. You say that a lot around me. He settled against the wall opposite her, arms crossed, looking entirely too pleased with himself. Should I be offended? You should be somewhere else. Can't. I live here now. Remember? His eyes sparkled with amusement. Terrible coincidence, really. The elevator began its descent, and Phoebe fixed her gaze on the floor numbers. 14, 13, 12. Each second felt like an hour. Nice weather we're having, Brian said conversationally. Are we really going to do small talk? I'm trying to be neighborly. Isn't that what neighbors do? Normal neighbors, maybe. We're not normal neighbors. No. He tilted his head, studying her in that unnerving way he had. What kind of neighbors are we? The kind that pretend the other doesn't exist. Sounds lonely. Something in his tone made her look at him, despite her better judgment. For just a moment, his expression was almost serious, a flicker of something genuine beneath the usual arrogance. Then he smiled, and the moment shattered. Although I have to say, neighbor, ignoring you is proving remarkably difficult. Phoebe's heart did something stupid in her chest. Try harder. Where's the fun in that? Before she could respond, Brian pushed off the wall and moved closer, not touching but near enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell that damned cologne that was becoming far too familiar. What are you doing? Her voice came out breathier than intended. There's something... He reached out, and Phoebe's breath caught as his fingers moved toward her face. But instead of touching her, he plucked something from her hair, holding it up between them. Loose thread, from your coat, I think. She stared at the tiny piece of navy fiber, then at his face. He was watching her with an intensity that made her stomach flip. Thank you, she managed, proud that her voice only shook slightly. Any time, Phoebe. The elevator dinged at the ground floor, and Phoebe practically lunged for the opening doors. She made it 3 steps into the lobby before realizing he was right behind her. We work in the same direction, Brian said, clearly reading her mind. Don't worry, I'm not following you, though your paranoia is somewhat flattering. I'm not paranoid. No? Then why did Carlos tell me you've been checking the security feed before calling the elevator? Phoebe's face flamed. She shot a betrayed look at Carlos, who was suddenly very interested in the potted plant by his desk. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, with as much dignity as she could muster. Brian leaned in, close enough that she could see the darker flecks in his eyes. You're a terrible liar, counselor. Good thing you work in corporate law, not criminal defense. Then, before she could process what was happening, he reached out and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. The gesture was casual, intimate, completely unexpected. His fingers lingered for just a heartbeat against her jaw. See you tonight, neighbor, he murmured, and walked away toward the parking garage. Phoebe stood frozen in the lobby, her skin burning where he touched her, her heart racing like she'd just run a marathon. Behind her, she heard Carlos chuckle. Told you, the doorman said cheerfully. Better than my telenovelas. What Phoebe thought as she walked to her car, this was getting out of hand. Phoebe's hand trembled slightly as she unlocked her car, Brian's touch still ghosting across her skin like a brand. She'd spent 2 years successfully avoiding him at events, keeping their interactions to icy nods and the occasional cutting remark. 2 years of carefully maintained distance. 3 days in the same building had destroyed all of that. She slid into the driver's seat, tossing her briefcase onto the passenger side with more force than necessary. The problem wasn't that Brian was attractive. She'd known that from the beginning. Half the women in their social circle knew that. She'd seen them orbit around him at galas like moths to a flame. The problem was that she was starting to notice things she'd successfully ignored before. The way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the deep rumble of his voice that seemed to vibrate through her entire body, the fact that his smirk, annoying as it was, made him look boyish and somehow vulnerable. Stop it, she told herself firmly, starting the car. He's the same man who was making out with a stranger in a bathroom. The same man who called you uptight. He's arrogant, presumptuous, and completely wrong for you. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marina. Lunch today? Need details about your morning? Phoebe smiled despite herself. Marina had an uncanny ability to sense when something interesting happened. It was both her best and most annoying quality. Nothing to tell, Phoebe typed back. The response was immediate. Liar. I can feel the tension through the phone. Spill. Phoebe sighed and pulled out of the parking garage, very deliberately not looking to see if Brian's black Mercedes was still there. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction, even if part of her, a very small, very foolish part, was already wondering what time he usually came home in the evenings. What Brian thought watching her leave. She was rattled. Good. Brian leaned against his car, watching Phoebe's silver sedan pull out of the garage with perhaps more speed than necessary. He hadn't missed the slight tremor in her hand when he'd tucked that hair behind her ear, or the way her breathing had quickened when he'd moved closer in the elevator. Phoebe Dalton might claim to despise him, but her body told a different story. He should probably feel guilty about deliberately provoking her. The gentleman thing would be to give her space, respect her obvious desire to maintain distance. Brian had never claimed to be a gentleman. His phone buzzed with a message from his father. Board meeting at 2. Don't be late, and stop whatever you're doing that has you smiling like an idiot. Brian laughed. His father knew him too well. But there was no way he was explaining to Raymond Holloway that his good mood stemmed from successfully irritating the woman who'd occupied far too much mental real estate for the past 2 years. As he drove toward the bank's headquarters, Brian replayed the morning's encounter. The way Phoebe had tried so hard to ignore him, the flush that had colored her cheeks, those green eyes flashing with annoyance and something else, something that looked suspiciously like awareness. He'd moved into this building on impulse, really. The penthouse had decent views, good security, and happened to be in the same building as one Phoebe Dalton. The fact that it put them in close proximity was just convenient. Brian Holloway didn't believe in coincidences. He believed in opportunities. And Phoebe was starting to look like the best opportunity he'd had in years. 2 weeks into the neighbor situation, and Phoebe had developed what Marina called an unhealthy elevator obsession. She'd memorized Brian's schedule down to the minute. 7:15 in the morning, 6:30 in the evening, sometimes 9 o'clock if he worked late. Tonight, she'd timed it perfectly. 6:45, safely past his usual return time. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor, and Phoebe stepped in with a satisfied smile, Chinese takeout bag in hand. Finally, a peaceful ride home where she could, holding the door. No. Brian jogged into the lobby, his tie loosened and jacket slung over one shoulder, looking disheveled in a way that should have been unattractive, but absolutely wasn't. He slid into the elevator just as the doors began to close, grinning when he saw her expression. "We have to stop meeting like this," he said cheerfully. "People will talk." "People already talk," Phoebe muttered. "Mostly about your complete lack of boundaries." "Boundaries are overrated." He sniffed the air. "Is that Szechuan Palace? The one on 5th Street? Despite herself, Phoebe felt a flicker of surprise. "How did you—" "I'd recognize that garlic sauce anywhere. Best Chinese food in the city." He leaned against the elevator wall, studying her takeout bag with interest. "What did you get? Please tell me you ordered the crispy beef. It's incredible." Yes, actually." His face lit up. "Excellent choice. Did you get the soup dumplings?" "Of course. They're the best part." Finally, something we agree on. Brian's smile was different now, genuine without the usual edge of provocation. "I usually order from there twice a week. The owner, Mrs. Chen, makes fun of my terrible Mandarin every time I call." Phoebe found herself smiling despite her better judgment. "She does that to everyone. I'm pretty sure it's her love language. Last week she told me I pronounced dumplings like a dying walrus." A laugh escaped before Phoebe could stop it, a real one, surprised and genuine. Brian's eyes widened slightly, as if he'd just witnessed something rare and precious. "You should do that more often," he said quietly. "What?" "Laugh. It's—" He trailed off, something shifting in his expression. "It's nice." The elevator suddenly felt smaller, warmer. Phoebe clutched her takeout bag, very aware of how Brian was looking at her, not with his usual playful arrogance, but with something softer, more dangerous. The elevator jerked to a halt. They both stumbled slightly. Phoebe grabbed the handrail while Brian steadied himself against the wall. The lights flickered once, then held. "Please tell me that was normal," Phoebe said. Brian pressed the button for her floor. Nothing happened. He tried the door open button. Still nothing. "Okay, don't panic, but I think we're stuck." "We're what?" "Stuck, as in not moving." He pulled out his phone, frowning. "No signal. These elevator walls are like a bunker." Phoebe's heart started racing for entirely different reasons now. She jabbed the emergency call button repeatedly. A crackling sound came through the speaker, followed by Carlos's voice. "Miss Dalton, Mr. Holloway, can you hear me?" "Carlos," Phoebe nearly shouted. "The elevator stopped." Yes, I see that on the monitor. Don't worry, this happens sometimes. Maintenance says it's a sensor issue. They'll have someone here in about 45 minutes. 45 minutes? Could be an hour, traffic, you know. Carlos sounded entirely too cheerful. You two just sit tight. At least you have company. The speaker clicked off. Phoebe turned slowly to look at Brian, who was trying very hard not to smile. Don't, she warned. Don't you dare say anything. I wasn't going to say anything. You were absolutely going to say something. Well, maybe I was going to mention that this is very convenient. Convenient? We're trapped in an elevator. With delicious Chinese food. Brian slid down the wall to sit on the floor, patting the space beside him. Come on, counselor. Might as well get comfortable. That crispy beef isn't going to eat itself. Phoebe stared at him for a long moment. The universe clearly hated her. That was the only explanation. With a resigned sigh, she sank down beside him, carefully maintaining a foot of space between them. She opened the takeout bag, and the aroma of garlic and ginger filled the small space. I'm not sharing, she said firmly. Brian gasped in mock horror. You're going to make me watch you eat Szechuan Palace and not offer me even one dumpling? That's cold, Dalton, ice cold. You called me uptight. You called me insufferable. You are insufferable. And you're uptight. He grinned. But you're also trapped in an elevator with me for the next hour, so you might as well make the best of it. Phoebe pulled out a container of soup dumplings, steam rising from the lid. Brian watched with the focus of a starving man. She took one, bit into it carefully, and made a very satisfied sound. You're killing me, Brian groaned. She took another bite, maintaining eye contact. So good. You're evil. Genuinely evil. I learned from the best. They stared at each other. And then, Phoebe didn't know who started it. They both started laughing. Real, genuine laughter that echoed in the confined space. Fine, Phoebe said, pulling out the second pair of chopsticks. But only because I don't want to listen to you whine for an hour. I don't whine. You absolutely whine. Brian accepted the chopsticks, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. That familiar spark of awareness shot through her, but this time, in the warm glow of the elevator lights, with the smell of their shared meal between them, it felt less threatening, almost nice. Truce? Brian offered, holding up a dumpling. Phoebe clinked her dumpling against his. Temporary truce, until we're out of this elevator. I'll take it. As they ate together in companionable silence, occasionally arguing over the last spring roll or the proper way to use chopsticks, Phoebe realized something terrifying. She was actually enjoying herself. What Brian thought as they shared the meal, this was perfect. Brian watched Phoebe explain, with completely unnecessary hand gestures, why her method of eating dumplings was superior to his. Her hair had fallen loose from its professional bun, framing her face in soft waves. She'd kicked off her heels, and there was sauce on her chin that she hadn't noticed yet. She looked beautiful, real, nothing like the ice queen who'd glared at him in the lobby 3 weeks ago. You have something? He reached out, thumb brushing the corner of her mouth to wipe away the sauce. Phoebe froze, her eyes going wide. For a moment, they just stared at each other, his thumb still resting against her skin, her breath catching in a way that made his heart pound. Then the elevator jerked back to life. They sprang apart as if burned, Phoebe scrambling to her feet and shoving her heels back on, while Brian stood more slowly, trying to get his suddenly racing pulse under control. Well, Phoebe said, her voice slightly breathless. That was, yeah. The elevator dinged at her floor. Thanks for sharing your dinner, Brian said, surprised by how much he meant it. Phoebe grabbed her bag, paused at the door. It was not completely terrible. She fled before he could respond, leaving Brian alone in the elevator with the lingering scent of garlic and jasmine perfume and the certain knowledge that everything had just changed. Phoebe had successfully avoided Brian for 3 entire days following the elevator incident. She'd taken the stairs twice, claimed emergency meetings that didn't exist, and even considered rappelling from her balcony like some kind of corporate ninja. Marina had called it pathetic. Phoebe called it strategic retreat. Now, sitting in the senior partners' conference room at Dalton & Associates, she was mentally calculating whether she could fake a sudden illness convincing enough to escape the Monday morning meeting. Her father, Richard Dalton, sat at the head of the table looking particularly pleased with himself, which usually meant either a major case win or terrible news disguised as good news. Gentlemen, lady, Richard began, nodding at Phoebe. I have extraordinary news. We've been approached by Holloway Financial Group for a major contract. Phoebe's stomach dropped. The bank is undergoing a complete legal restructuring and compliance audit, her father continued, oblivious to Phoebe's sudden desire to melt into the floor. It's a 6-month project, potentially worth 7 figures. They've specifically requested our firm. That's fantastic, James Peterson, one of the senior partners, said. Who's taking point? Richard smiled at his daughter. Phoebe. What? The word came out strangled. Mr. Holloway specifically asked for you, said he'd heard excellent things about your work on the Morrison merger. Her father's expression was proud, which made this so much worse. This could be career-defining, sweetheart. A bank this size, that kind of exposure. There are more experienced attorneys. Phoebe interrupted, her mind racing. James has been doing corporate restructuring for 15 years. And Mr. Holloway wants you. Richard's tone suggested the discussion was over. The contract meeting is this afternoon, 2 o'clock. At exactly 1:55 p.m., Phoebe stood outside Conference Room A, seriously contemplating whether professional suicide was a viable career move. Through the glass walls, she could see Brian sitting at the table, looking infuriatingly comfortable in a navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary. He glanced up, made eye contact, and smiled. Phoebe considered running. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, clutched her leather portfolio, and walked in like she was heading to battle. Which, in a way, she was. Miss Dalton. Brian stood, extending his hand with perfect professional courtesy. Thank you for meeting with me. His hand was warm, strong, and Phoebe tried very hard not to remember how those fingers had brushed her chin 3 days ago. Mr. Holloway. She sat across from him, arranging her files with deliberate precision. I understand you requested me specifically for this project. I did. Why? He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark eyes. You're good at what you do. Thorough, detail-oriented, and you don't back down from a challenge. Those are exactly the qualities I need in my legal counsel. There are attorneys with more experience. I don't want more experience. I want the best person for the job. He slid a folder across the table. That's you. Phoebe opened the folder, scanning the scope of work. It was massive. Contracts, compliance reviews, corporate restructuring, international regulations, months of intensive work, close collaboration, constant meetings. With Brian, this is... She searched for a professional word. Extensive. We're not a small operation. There was pride in his voice. I'm not asking for hand-holding. I know you'll tell me exactly what I don't want to hear, which is why I trust you. Despite herself, Phoebe felt a flicker of respect. He wasn't trying to charm her. He was being direct, professional. It was unexpected. If I take this, she said carefully, we need ground rules. Such as? This stays completely professional. No, she gestured vaguely. No elevator incidents. No touching my hair. No calling me neighbor in business meetings. Brian's mouth twitched. You have my word. During business hours, I'll be the picture of professional courtesy. During business hours? Well, I can't promise not to annoy you in the elevator after 6 p.m. I have a reputation to maintain. Brian, joking. He raised his hands in surrender, but his eyes were dancing. Mostly. Look, Phoebe, I know we didn't exactly start off on the right foot. You called me uptight. You called me insufferable. You were making out with someone in a bathroom at a charity event. Brian had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. That was not my finest moment. I was going through a phase. A phase of being a playboy? A phase of being stupid. He met her eyes directly. I'm not that guy anymore, or at least, I'm trying not to be. The sincerity in his voice surprised her. Phoebe found herself studying him more carefully, the slight shadows under his eyes suggesting long work hours, the way his shoulders held tension despite his relaxed posture. He looked like a man carrying significant weight. Why the restructuring? She asked. Holloway Financial is performing well. I've seen the quarterly reports. Brian's expression shifted, becoming more serious. My father's retiring next year. The board wants to ensure a smooth transition, which means getting our legal house in order. Some of our older contracts are, let's say they reflect a different era of business practices. Your father is Raymond Holloway. It wasn't a question. Everyone in business knew Raymond Holloway, brilliant, ruthless, and notorious for his old-school negotiation tactics. In the flesh. Brian smiled wryly. And before you ask, yes, working for your father while preparing to replace him is exactly as complicated as it sounds. For the first time, Phoebe saw past the arrogant banker facade to something more vulnerable. Brian wasn't just some privileged executive playing at work. He was genuinely trying to prove himself. "All right," she heard herself say. "I'll take the case." Relief flashed across his face. "Really? On one condition." "Name it." "The elevator sharing stops. I can't focus if I'm constantly trying to avoid you in our own building." Brian considered this. "Counteroffer. I'll stop deliberately timing my elevator trips to coincide with yours if you stop checking the security feed before calling it." Phoebe felt her face heat. "How did you—" "Carlos talks. A lot." Brian grinned. "Especially when I bring him coffee. You bribed my doorman. I'd call it strategic information gathering. Despite everything, the irritation, the attraction, the complete absurdity of the situation, Phoebe laughed. "You're impossible." "So I've been told." Brian extended his hand again. "Do we have a deal, counselor?" Phoebe shook his hand, trying to ignore the warmth of his palm against hers. "Deal. But I'm serious about the professional boundaries." "As am I." His thumb brushed across her knuckles before he released her hand. "During business hours only, of course. What happens at 6:01 p.m.? His smile turned wicked. "I guess we'll find out." As Phoebe gathered her files and stood to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just agreed to something far more complicated than a simple legal contract. Brian watched her go, his expression unreadable. Then, just as she reached the door, he called out, "Phoebe?" She turned. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you said yes." The sincerity in his voice made her heart do something complicated. "Don't make me regret it," she said softly. As she walked back to her office, Phoebe tried to convince herself this was just another case, just another client. But the butterflies in her stomach suggested otherwise. 3 weeks into the project, and Phoebe had developed a new problem. Brian Holloway was actually brilliant at his job. She'd expected arrogance. She'd gotten competence. She'd expected him to delegate everything. Instead, he sat across from her at 10 p.m. on a Thursday, sleeves rolled up, tie discarded somewhere around hour 3, reviewing contracts with the focus of someone who actually cared about the details. "This clause is problematic," Brian said, tapping a paragraph with his pen. "If we agree to these terms, we're essentially giving up negotiating power in future mergers." Phoebe looked up from her laptop, surprised. "You caught that?" "I read the fine print, counselor. Shocking, I know. I just thought—" She trailed off, realizing how it sounded. "That I was just a pretty face who inherited Daddy's company." His tone was light, but something flickered in his eyes. "No, It's fine. Most people think that." Brian leaned back in his chair, stretching his shoulders. "Raymond Holloway's spoiled son, coasting on the family name. I'm used to it." Phoebe felt an unexpected pang of guilt. She had thought exactly that if she was honest with herself. "For what it's worth, I was wrong. You're good at this." His smile was genuine. Was that a compliment? From the Ice Queen herself? "Don't push it." "Too late. I'm savoring the moment." He stood walking to the small coffee station in his office. "Want a refill?" "Fair warning, it's terrible. My secretary makes it and I think she's trying to poison me." "Why would she do that?" "I rejected her nephew for an internship. Apparently family loyalty trumps my stellar leadership." He poured 2 cups, bringing one to Phoebe. "Here, suffer with me." She took a sip and immediately regretted it. "Oh God, that's awful." "Right? It's like she boiled dirt and added disappointment." Brian sat on the edge of the desk beside her, closer than strictly professional but not quite inappropriate. "I keep drinking it because I'm too scared to tell her the truth." "The big bad banker is afraid of his secretary?" "You haven't met Margaret. She's terrifying. Last month she made a grown man cry using only a disapproving look." Phoebe laughed, and Brian's expression softened in that way that made her stomach flip. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm over the past weeks, professional banter mixed with moments of genuine connection. It was dangerous, comfortable. "You should laugh more," he said quietly. "You light up when you do." The air between them suddenly felt charged. Phoebe became hyper-aware of how close he was, the warmth radiating from him, the way his eyes had darkened slightly. "Brian," I know. Professional boundaries. But he didn't move away. It's just, you have this wall up all the time. Even when you're laughing, I can see you stopping yourself from really letting go. Maybe I like my walls. Maybe you've never had a reason to take them down. Her breath caught. They were staring at each other now, the contract forgotten, the terrible coffee cooling in their cups. Brian's hand moved slowly toward her face, giving her plenty of time to pull away. She didn't. His fingers brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. That gesture he'd done before, but this time it felt different, intentional. His hand lingered, cupping her jaw gently, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Phoebe," he murmured, his voice rough. "Tell me to stop." She should. Every logical part of her brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea. He was her client, her neighbor, the man she'd sworn to keep at arm's length. But logic had no place in the way her heart was racing, or the magnetic pull drawing her toward him. "I should," she whispered. "But are you going to?" Before she could answer, his office door opened. "Brian, I need those—" "Oh!" They sprang apart like teenagers caught by parents. An older man stood in the doorway, early 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that were currently dancing with barely suppressed amusement. He looked exactly like an older version of Brian. "Dad," Brian said, his voice strangled, "I thought you'd left for the day." Clearly, Raymond Holloway's smile was positively gleeful. "And you must be Miss Dalton. My son's mentioned you, frequently, at length, with a dopey expression I haven't seen since he was 16 and had a crush on his chemistry teacher." "Dad!" Phoebe felt her face burning. She stood, extending her hand with as much dignity as she could muster. "Mr. Holloway, it's a pleasure to meet you." Raymond shook her hand warmly. "The pleasure is mine. I've been wanting to meet the woman who has my son working past 6 p.m. voluntarily. Usually, I have to threaten him." "We were just reviewing contracts," Phoebe said, her professional voice firmly back in place. Is that what the kids are calling it these days?" Raymond's eyes twinkled. "Well, don't let me interrupt your contract review. Brian, try not to be a complete idiot. This one seems too smart for you. Thanks for the vote of confidence." "Any time, son." Raymond headed for the door, then paused. "Ms. Dalton, fair warning. My son is terrible at expressing his feelings. He'll probably make a mess of things. Try to be patient with him." "Dad, I swear—" "Good night, you two." The door closed behind him. Silence. "So," Brian finally said, "that was mortifying." Phoebe pressed her hands to her flaming cheeks. "Your father thinks we're— Yeah." "And he seemed delighted, yes." Brian ran a hand through his hair. "He's been pestering me to settle down for years. This is his dream scenario. We're not— This isn't— I know." But something in his expression suggested he wished otherwise. "We should probably call it a night." Phoebe gathered her things quickly, desperately needing space to process what had almost happened. At the door, she paused. "Brian?" "Yeah?" "We can't do this." His jaw tightened. "I know." But as she walked to her car, Phoebe couldn't shake the feeling that knowing something was impossible didn't make wanting it any less real. Marina cornered Phoebe in her office the next morning, armed with coffee and determination. "Spill!" she demanded, setting a latte on Phoebe's desk. "And don't even try to pretend nothing happened. You have that look." "What look?" "The I almost kissed my impossibly hot client and now I'm spiraling look. I've seen it before." Phoebe dropped her head to her desk with a thud. "His father caught us." "Caught you doing what?" "Nothing. We were just close. Too close. His hand was on my face and we were about to—" She groaned. "And then Raymond Holloway walked in and made jokes about Brian having a crush on me." Marina's squeal was unholy. "This is the best thing I've heard all week. What did Brian do?" "Looked like he wanted to die." "And what did you do?" "Ran away like a coward." Classic Phoebe. Marina sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "So when are you going to admit you're attracted to him?" "I'm not—" "Honey, please. I've seen you check your hair in the elevator mirror before meetings with him. You wore that burgundy dress last week, the one you save for court appearances you need to win. And yesterday, you said his name in your sleep during your lunch nap." Phoebe's head shot up. "I did not." "You absolutely did. You said, 'Brian, stop being so—'" And then you woke up. Marina leaned forward conspiratorially. Finish the sentence. What was Dream Brian doing? This conversation is over. He's clearly into you. You're clearly into him. Why fight it? Because he's my client, Marina. Because I've seen him with other women. Because getting involved with Brian Holloway is professional suicide and personal destruction wrapped in a very attractive package. Marina studied her for a long moment. Or maybe you're just scared. Before Phoebe could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Brian. Breakfast meeting tomorrow. 8 a.m. Bring your appetite and your red pen. This contract isn't going to eviscerate itself. Despite everything, Phoebe smiled. Marina saw it. You're doomed. The next morning, Phoebe arrived at the restaurant to find Brian already seated, looking unfairly good in a charcoal suit. What made her stomach clench, however, was the woman sitting across from him. Tall, blonde, stunning in a way that made Phoebe suddenly conscious of every imperfection. The woman laughed at something Brian said, touching his arm with easy familiarity. Phoebe's chest tightened with something that felt suspiciously like jealousy. Brian looked up, saw her, and his entire face changed. The polite smile became genuine, warm. He stood immediately. Phoebe. Perfect timing. He gestured to the blonde. This is Victoria Chen, our new VP of International Operations. Victoria, this is Phoebe Dalton, the attorney I mentioned. Victoria extended a perfectly manicured hand. The famous Ms. Dalton. Brian talks about you constantly. Phoebe thinks this. Phoebe suggested that. I was beginning to think you were fictional. I assure you I'm very real, Phoebe said, proud that her voice came out steady. Victoria was just leaving, Brian said, his eyes never leaving Phoebe's face. She stopped by to discuss the Singapore deal. All business, this one? Victoria said fondly, gathering her designer bag. Try to make him take a break occasionally, Miss Dalton. He works too hard. She squeezed Brian's shoulder as she passed. See you at the board meeting, Brian. Phoebe slid into the now vacant chair, trying to ignore the lingering scent of expensive perfume. She seems nice. She is. Brilliant mind for international markets. Brian pushed a menu toward her. How do you feel about waffles? I feel like they're breakfast food. Insightful. His mouth twitched. You're deflecting. I don't know what you mean. You have the same expression you get when opposing counsel tries to use outdated precedent. He leaned forward. Like you want to argue about something, but you're not sure you have grounds. I don't... You were jealous. Phoebe's face flamed. I was not. Yes, you were. Your left eye twitches when you're annoyed. It's twitching right now. She pressed her hand to her eye. That's ridiculous. Is it? Brian's voice dropped lower. Because I was jealous last week when that associate from Peterson's firm asked you to dinner. Phoebe blinked. How did you... You mentioned it in passing during a meeting. Very casually. Like it didn't matter. His jaw tightened. Did you go? That's none of your business. Did you go? The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. No. I was busy reviewing your contracts. Something dangerous flashed in his expression. Good. Good? Yeah, good. He sat back, running a hand through his hair. This is insane. We're sitting here discussing jealousy over other people when we're supposed to be maintaining professional boundaries. You're the one who brought it up. You started it with your face. My face? Yes, that face you make when you're trying not to show what you're feeling but failing miserably. He smiled, softer now. It's cute. Infuriating, but cute. The waitress appeared, mercifully interrupting before Phoebe could formulate a response. They ordered waffles for him, an omelette for her, and spent the rest of breakfast discussing contracts with an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with legal clauses. When Brian reached across the table to steal a bite of her hash browns, their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away immediately. We're in trouble, aren't we? Phoebe said quietly. Brian's thumb traced across her knuckles. So much trouble. But neither of them let go. Absolutely not. Phoebe stared at the travel itinerary Brian had just slid across her desk like it was a live grenade. Boston, 3 days, meetings with international investors, and, she checked the hotel booking, rooms on the same floor. It's necessary, Brian said calmly, leaning against her office doorframe like he owned it. These investors want to meet the legal team in person before committing to the restructuring. You're the legal team. Send someone else. James would love a trip to Boston. James didn't spend 6 weeks learning every detail of this case. His expression was serious now. I need you there, Phoebe. Not just any attorney. You. The sincerity in his voice made her resolve waver. Brian, I know what you're thinking. Close quarters, away from the office, too much temptation. He moved closer, his voice dropping. I'm thinking the same thing. But we're adults. We can handle 3 days of professional interaction. Can we? We haven't killed each other yet. That's progress. Marina appeared in the doorway behind Brian, her timing impeccable as always. Oh, good. You're discussing the Boston trip. I already booked your tickets. You leave Thursday morning. Marina! Phoebe's voice came out strangled. What? Your father approved it. Said it would be good for your career. Marina's smile was pure innocence. I got you the window seat, honey. You're welcome. Brian's laugh was warm. I like her. Everyone likes Marina, Phoebe muttered. She's a menace disguised as helpfulness. I prefer fairy godmother, Marina corrected cheerfully. Now I need to steal your hot client for a moment. Mr. Holloway, your father is online too and he says it's urgent. Brian sighed. That man has the worst timing. He looked back at Phoebe. Thursday, 7 a.m. Don't be late, counselor. After he left, Phoebe glared at her secretary. You're enjoying this way too much. Honey, you two have been dancing around each other for 2 months. Someone needs to force the issue. Marina perched on the edge of Phoebe's desk. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? You spend 3 days in a romantic city with a gorgeous man who's clearly crazy about you. He's my client. The contract ends in 4 months. Start planning ahead. You're impossible. And you're in denial, Marina sang, walking back to her desk. Safety Sammy beyond a Thursday morning arrived far too quickly. Phoebe stood in the airport terminal, watching Brian negotiate with the gate agent about seat assignments with the kind of charm that probably got him anything he wanted. All set, he said, returning with their boarding passes. I got us moved to first class. You didn't have to do that. I know. But the last thing I need is you cramped in coach, arriving cranky to these meetings. You're scary enough when you're comfortable. I'm not scary. You reduced a senior partner to stuttering last week with one raised eyebrow. It was magnificent and terrifying. Despite herself, Phoebe smiled. He was using a case from 1987 that had been overturned. He deserved it. See, terrifying. Brian gestured toward security. Shall we? The flight was surprisingly pleasant. Brian worked on his laptop while Phoebe reviewed notes, their shoulders occasionally brushing in the confined space. When turbulence hit over Connecticut, Phoebe's hand shot out instinctively, grabbing the armrest, which was currently occupied by Brian's hand. Their fingers tangled together. Neither pulled away. Nervous flyer? He asked softly. Only during turbulence. Want me to distract you? How? He squeezed her hand gently. Tell me something I don't know about you. Something not in your very impressive professional bio. Phoebe considered this. I wanted to be a ballet dancer when I was 7. Really? Until my first recital, when I fell off the stage into the orchestra pit, landed on a tuba player. He was very understanding, but I decided law was safer. Brian's laugh was rich and genuine. I would pay good money to see that footage. My mother has it. She threatens to show it at family gatherings when I get too serious. I like her already. The plane steadied, but Brian didn't release her hand. My turn. I'm terrified of dogs. What? The big bad banker is afraid of puppies. A Great Dane knocked me over when I was 6 and stole my ice cream. I've been traumatized ever since. His expression was sheepish. Victoria has a teacup poodle named Princess. It weighs 4 pounds and I cross the street when I see her walking it. Phoebe burst out laughing. That's ridiculous. It has tiny teeth and it yaps. But he was grinning. See? We all have our things. The pilot announced their descent into Boston. Reluctantly, Phoebe pulled her hand away, immediately missing the warmth. The hotel was elegant, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Brian checked them in while Phoebe pretended not to notice the knowing look the receptionist gave them. Your rooms are on the 14th floor, the woman said, handing over key cards. 1408 and 1410, right next to each other. Of course they were. In the elevator, a different elevator, Phoebe noted, but elevators seemed to be their thing. Brian leaned against the wall. Dinner tonight? We should prepare for tomorrow's meeting. Is that what we're calling it? Would you prefer I admit I just want to have dinner with you? His eyes held hers. Because I can do that too. Phoebe's heart hammered. Business dinner. 7 p.m. Meet in the lobby. It's a date. It's not a date. Keep telling yourself that, counselor. Her room was beautiful. King bed, city view, completely wasted on her because all she could think about was Brian in the next room. One wall away. A knock at the connecting door made her jump. She opened it to find Brian standing there, tie loosened, looking unfairly attractive. Just checking that the door works, he said, in case you need anything. Like what? He shrugged, but his eyes were dark with something that made her mouth go dry. Room service menu recommendations, extra towels. Someone to share that very large bottle of wine I noticed in your minibar. Brian. Phoebe. He stepped closer, and she could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from him. I'm trying really hard to be professional here, but you're making it incredibly difficult. I'm not doing anything. You're existing, that's enough. He reached out, tucking that eternal strand of hair behind her ear. Tell me you don't feel this. She couldn't, because she did feel it. This magnetic pull, this constant awareness, this need to be near him that defied all logic. I feel it, she whispered. But that doesn't mean we should... I know. His thumb traced her cheekbone, achingly gentle. Rain check on that wine? Maybe. I'll take it. He stepped back, and Phoebe immediately felt the loss. See you at 7, counselor. The door closed between them, and Phoebe sank onto her bed, heart racing. 3 days in Boston. What could possibly happen? Dinner was supposed to be professional, a quiet restaurant, contract discussions, early night. It lasted 4 hours. Somewhere between the appetizers and dessert, they'd stopped talking about compliance regulations and started talking about everything else. Phoebe learned that Brian had spent a semester in Italy during college and still dreamed in Italian sometimes. He learned that she'd once accidentally sent a legal brief to opposing counsel with a recipe for banana bread in the footnotes. How does that even happen? Brian asked, laughing so hard he had to wipe his eyes. I was stress baking and working on my laptop in the kitchen. The files got mixed up. Phoebe's face was red, but she was laughing too. The opposing attorney called to ask if the banana bread was part of our settlement terms. What did you say? That it was a very aggressive negotiation tactic and he should be worried. She took a sip of wine. He actually seemed intimidated. Remind me never to oppose you in court. You're terrifying even when you're talking about baked goods. The waiter brought the check, and Brian grabbed it before Phoebe could protest. Company expense. I'm the client, remember? I remember that you keep conveniently forgetting professional boundaries. I'm very good at selective memory. He signed the receipt, then stood, offering his hand. Walk with me? The harbor's beautiful at night. She should say no. Should go back to her room, review tomorrow's presentation, maintain appropriate distance. She took his hand. The Boston waterfront was indeed beautiful, lights reflecting off the water, a cool breeze carrying the salt smell of the ocean. They walked in comfortable silence, hands still linked in a way that felt natural now, inevitable. Can I ask you something? Brian said finally. That depends on the question. Why law? You mentioned wanting to be a ballet dancer, but what made you choose corporate law specifically? Phoebe considered this. My father. I grew up watching him help companies grow, protect jobs, create opportunities. He made law seem noble, like we were the good guys. She smiled wryly. Naive, maybe. Not naive. Idealistic. There's a difference. Brian stopped, turning to face her. You still believe that, don't you, that what we do matters? Most days, don't you? I do now. His voice was quiet. Before this project, before you, I was just going through the motions, playing the part of the responsible son taking over Daddy's company. But watching you work, seeing how much you care about getting every detail right, he stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. You reminded me why I wanted to do this in the first place. Phoebe's throat tightened. Brian, I'm not good at this, he interrupted. The serious stuff. I hide behind jokes and arrogance because it's easier than admitting I'm terrified of failing, of being just another privileged kid who inherited success without earning it. You've earned it. I've seen you work. You're brilliant. You think so? I know so. She reached up, surprising herself, cupping his jaw. Stop selling yourself short. Brian's hand covered hers, holding it against his face. Phoebe, I need to tell you something. What? That night 2 years ago in the bathroom at the gala, I wasn't just randomly making out with someone. Phoebe's stomach dropped. I don't need to hear about your conquests. I was trying to forget you. His eyes held hers, intense and vulnerable. You'd given a speech that night about corporate responsibility. You were wearing a green dress, and you were so passionate, so brilliant, and I couldn't stop watching you. Couldn't stop thinking about you. So you grabbed the nearest woman. I told you it wasn't my finest moment. He looked genuinely ashamed. I was an idiot. I am an idiot. But that woman, I don't even remember her name. I just remember the look on your face when you saw us. The disappointment, that's what stuck with me. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know. That man, the one you saw in the bathroom, I don't want to be him anymore. I haven't been him for a long time. He stepped closer, and Phoebe's back pressed against the harbor railing. You changed something in me that night, made me want to be better. The water lapped behind her. The city lights blurred. All Phoebe could see was Brian, the way he was looking at her like she was something precious, something worth fighting for. This is a bad idea, she whispered. Terrible idea. We're working together. I know. The contract doesn't end for months. I know that too. So we should... He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was urgent, desperate. 2 months of tension finally breaking free. His hands cupped her face, angling her head to deepen the kiss, and Phoebe melted into him, her fingers fisting in his jacket to pull him closer. He tasted like wine and want and everything she'd been denying herself. When his tongue traced her lower lip, she opened for him with a soft sound that made him groan. Phoebe, he murmured against her mouth. God, Phoebe! A group of laughing tourists rounded the corner, breaking the moment. They sprang apart, both breathing hard, staring at each other. That was... Phoebe started. Yeah. We can't... I know. But when he reached for her hand to walk back to the hotel, she didn't pull away. And when they stood outside her room, the air thick with possibility, she almost invited him in. Good night, Brian, she said instead, her voice unsteady. Good night, Phoebe. He pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. Sweet dreams. She watched him disappear into his room, then leaned against her door, fingers touching her still tingling lips. Tomorrow, they'd pretend this never happened. Tonight, she'd let herself remember every second. Phoebe woke to aggressive knocking on the connecting door. Go away, she mumbled into her pillow. Can't. We have a meeting in 45 minutes, and I made the mistake of ordering room service coffee. Brian's voice was muffled but clearly distressed. It's worse than Margaret's. I think it's actively trying to kill me. Despite everything, the kiss, the confusion, the fact that she'd spent half the night staring at the ceiling replaying that kiss, Phoebe smiled. She stumbled to the door, opening it to find Brian standing there in dress pants and an undershirt, his hair adorably disheveled. You look terrible, she said. Good morning to you too, sunshine. He held up a coffee cup. Seriously, smell this. I'm pretty sure it's a biohazard. Phoebe took the cup, sniffed, and immediately recoiled. Oh my God. What did they make this with? Despair and regret? Right? I tipped the guy $20 and he still gave me this. Brian ran a hand through his hair, making it stick up more. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks away. Want to risk being late or risk this poison? Coffee shop. Definitely coffee shop. 20 minutes later, they were walking through Boston's morning streets. Phoebe in a simple black dress and Brian in his full suit, minus the tie. The early spring air was crisp, and their shoulders kept brushing as they walked. Neither mentioned the kiss. So, Brian said finally, about last night, we should forget about it. He stopped walking. Forget about it? It was a mistake. We got caught up in the moment, the wine, the romantic setting, the fact that I've wanted to kiss you since the day you moved into that building. His voice was tight. Was that a mistake too? Phoebe's heart hammered. Brian, we can't. The contract... Screw the contract. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who could lose everything. She hadn't meant to raise her voice, but frustration bubbled over. If this gets out, if people think I'm sleeping with my client for professional advancement, my reputation is destroyed. Everything I've worked for... You think I'd let that happen? Brian stepped closer, his voice intense. You think I'd let anyone question your professionalism, your integrity? It doesn't matter what you'd let happen. People talk, they assume, and I'm the one who pays the price. The hurt that flashed across his face made her chest ache. So that's it? We just pretend there's nothing between us? There can't be anything between us, not now, not until what? The contract ends? That's 4 months away, Phoebe. Then we wait 4 months. And what happens in the meantime? We just ignore each other, avoid eye contact, pretend I don't think about you every minute of every day. His raw honesty made her breath catch. Brian, no, you know what? You're right. He stepped back and his expression shuttered, becoming the cool professional she'd met months ago. It was a mistake. Heat of the moment. Won't happen again. Brian, I didn't mean... We should get that coffee. Meeting starts in 20 minutes. He walked ahead, leaving Phoebe standing on the sidewalk, feeling like she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. The investor meeting was torture. Brian was perfectly professional, charming, articulate, brilliant. He presented their restructuring plan with confidence, answered questions with ease, and barely looked at Phoebe, except when absolutely necessary. It was exactly what she'd asked for. It was killing her. Your legal counsel is very thorough, one of the investors said, smiling at Phoebe. Mr. Holloway speaks very highly of your work. Ms. Dalton is the best in her field, Brian said smoothly. The bank is fortunate to have her expertise. So formal, so distant, like they were strangers. After the meeting, as they gathered their materials, Brian's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and grimaced. I need to take this. My father. He has impeccable timing for checking in at the worst possible moments. He stepped into the hallway, and Phoebe could hear his side of the conversation. Yes, Dad. The meeting went well. No, I'm not going to discuss my personal life. Because there is no personal life to discuss. Dad, seriously. The investor's assistant, a friendly woman named Sarah, leaned over conspiratorially. You two make a lovely couple. Phoebe nearly dropped her laptop. We're just colleagues. Oh, my mistake. Sarah looked genuinely surprised. It's just the way he looks at you when you're not paying attention. My husband looks at me like that. She smiled warmly. Lucky woman, whoever eventually gets him. Phoebe's throat tightened as she watched Brian through the glass wall, pacing while arguing with his father, one hand gesturing animatedly. He caught her looking, and his expression softened for just a moment before he looked away. But the flight home was silent. Brian worked on his laptop. Phoebe pretended to read a brief. Neither spoke beyond polite necessities. When they landed, he insisted on getting her luggage from the overhead bin despite her protests. His fingers brushed hers as he handed it over, and electricity sparked between them. Phoebe, he said quietly, I'm sorry. For pushing, for making you uncomfortable. You didn't, I did. You were clear about your boundaries and I steamrolled over them. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'll be more professional going forward. You have my word. She wanted to tell him that professional was the last thing she wanted, that the kiss had been the best moment of her year, that she was terrified, not because she didn't want him, but because she wanted him too much. Instead, she said, Thank you. In the airport parking garage, they walked to their separate cars. Brian opened her door for her, ever the gentleman, and stepped back. See you Monday, counselor. See you Monday. She drove home alone, and if she cried somewhere around the 3rd mile, well, that was nobody's business but her own. Monday morning, Marina took one look at Phoebe's face and declared a state of emergency. Conference room, now, and bring tissues. I'm fine. Honey, you're wearing mismatched shoes and you put your blouse on inside out. You are the opposite of fine. Phoebe looked down at her feet, one black heel, one navy. Damn it. In the privacy of conference room B, Marina folded her arms. What happened in Boston? Nothing happened. Phoebe Elizabeth Dalton, I have known you for 6 years. I know when you're lying, and right now you're lying so hard, I'm surprised your nose isn't growing. Marina's expression softened. Talk to me. So Phoebe did. The kiss, the argument, Brian's hurt expression, the awful flight home. By the end, she was crying into the tissues Marina had wisely brought. So let me get this straight, Marina said slowly. You're in love with him, he's in love with you, but you won't do anything about it because of a contract that ends in 4 months? It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You're scared. And instead of being honest about that, you're hiding behind professional ethics that, frankly, don't even apply here. You're not his lawyer in a criminal case. You're doing corporate restructuring. There's no conflict of interest. People will talk. People always talk. Let them. Marina leaned forward. I've watched you be professional, be perfect, be careful your entire career. When are you going to let yourself just feel something? Before Phoebe could answer, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Raymond Holloway. We need to talk. My office, 2 p.m. Don't make me send security to collect you. Oh, God, Phoebe whispered. Brian's father wants to see me. Marina's eyes went wide. This is either very good or spectacularly bad. Raymond Holloway's office was twice the size of Brian's, with floor-to-ceiling windows and enough mahogany to build a small ship. The man himself sat behind his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, looking like a silver-haired version of his son. Ms. Dalton, sit. It wasn't a request. Phoebe sat, clutching her portfolio like a shield. Mr. Holloway, if this is about the restructuring, it's about my idiot son. Raymond removed his glasses, studying her with sharp eyes. He came back from Boston like someone kicked his puppy. Hasn't smiled in 3 days. Even Margaret noticed, and she's usually too busy plotting my demise to care about office morale. I'm not sure what this has to do with me. Don't insult my intelligence, young lady. I saw you two in his office that night. I saw the way he looks at you. Raymond's expression softened unexpectedly. My son is brilliant at business and terrible at emotions. Gets that from me, unfortunately. His mother, God rest her soul, used to say I had the emotional range of a brick wall. Despite her nervousness, Phoebe smiled. She was right, of course. Took me 3 years to work up the courage to ask her out. 3 years of pining and making excuses. Raymond leaned back in his chair. Finally, she cornered me at a Christmas party and told me I was being an idiot. Best decision of my life, letting her make it for me. That's a lovely story, but my point is, Brian got his stubbornness from me too. If you wait for him to make the first move now that you've rejected him, you'll be waiting forever. Holloway men are proud, stupidly proud. Phoebe's face burned. Mr. Holloway, I appreciate the concern, but my relationship with Brian is complicated by a contract that I could terminate tomorrow if I wanted to. Raymond's eyes twinkled. I'm still CEO for another 6 months. I have that power. You can't just... Can't I? My company. My rules. He stood walking to the window. But I won't. Know why? Because that would take the choice away from both of you, and my son needs to learn that sometimes the best things in life require risk. He turned back to her, his expression serious. But I will tell you this. I've watched Brian work harder in the last 3 months than I've seen in years. He cares about this restructuring because he cares about impressing you, about being worthy of you. Raymond smiled. Rather romantic, if you ask me, which you didn't, but I'm old and entitled to my opinions. Phoebe didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What am I supposed to do with this information? Whatever you want. Date him, don't date him, make him grovel. I recommend that last one, by the way, good for his character. Raymond moved toward his door, opening it in clear dismissal. But don't let fear make the decision for you. That's just wasting time you could be spending happy. As Phoebe stood to leave, Raymond added, Oh, and Miss Dalton, that restructuring plan you two put together, it's brilliant. Contract or no contract, you've secured yourself a permanent place in this company's future if you want it. You earned that. Nobody can take it from you. That evening, Phoebe stood in the elevator, staring at the button for the 15th floor. Her hand hovered, trembling slightly. Then she pressed penthouse. The doors opened to reveal Brian's floor. His apartment was straight ahead, warm light spilling from under the door. She could hear music playing, something soft and jazzy. She raised her hand to knock, lowered it, raised it again. You've been standing there for 3 minutes, Brian's voice came through the door. Either knock or go home, Phoebe. But stop torturing both of us. She knocked. The door opened and Brian stood there in jeans and a t-shirt, barefoot, looking tired and beautiful and completely shocked to see her. Hi, Phoebe said weakly. Hi. They stared at each other. I talked to your father, she blurted out. Brian's eyes widened. Oh God, what did he say? That I should make you grovel. A surprised laugh escaped him. That sounds like him. His expression grew cautious. Are you going to make me grovel? I haven't decided yet. Phoebe took a breath. But I think we need to talk. Really talk. About Boston. About us. About everything I said that I shouldn't have. Brian stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in. Phoebe stepped over the threshold, and somehow it felt like stepping into everything she'd been too scared to want. Brian's penthouse was nothing like Phoebe expected. She'd imagined sleek minimalism, all chrome and glass, a bachelor's showcase. Instead, she found warm woods, overstuffed bookshelves, and a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table. You do puzzles? She asked, surprised. Stress relief. Brian looked embarrassed. It's 1,000 pieces of the Italian coast. Been working on it for 3 months. That's, she searched for the right word, actually really sweet. Don't tell anyone. It would destroy my ruthless banker reputation. He gestured to the couch. Sit. Can I get you something? Wine, coffee that won't poison you, water. Brian, stop. He stopped, hands shoved in his pockets, looking nervous in a way she'd never seen him. The always confident director of Holloway Financial reduced to fidgeting like a teenager. I'm sorry, Phoebe said. For what I said in Boston. For making you feel like you were just some mistake I regretted. Were you wrong? His voice was quiet. About it being complicated? About your career being at risk? No. But I was wrong about... She took a breath. About pretending this is just attraction. Or convenience. Or some temporary insanity brought on by forced proximity. Brian's expression was carefully neutral. What is it then? I don't know. That's what terrifies me. Phoebe stood, pacing to his windows. The city spread below them, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. I've spent my entire life being careful, making the right choices, building my career with perfect precision. And then you showed up in that elevator, and everything became chaotic. I'm chaos? He sounded amused. You're chaos personified. You touch my hair for no reason. You show up in my takeout meals. You make me laugh when I'm trying to be angry. Her voice broke. You make me want things I shouldn't want. She heard him move closer, felt his warmth at her back. What things? This. You. Us. She turned to face him, and the vulnerability in his eyes nearly undid her. I want to come home to you every night. I want to wake up next to you. I want to bring you terrible coffee, and watch you pretend to like it because you're too polite to hurt my feelings. I wouldn't pretend, Brian said softly. I'd tell you it was terrible and then drink it anyway because you made it. A laugh escaped, tangled with tears. See? That? How am I supposed to resist that? Maybe you're not supposed to. He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face. Maybe we're both supposed to stop fighting this and just see where it goes. What about the contract? My reputation? The contract ends in 4 months. We can wait. His thumb stroked her cheekbone. I've waited 2 years. I can wait 4 more months. Brian, I'm in love with you. The words fell between them like bombs. I've been in love with you since you called me insufferable in that bathroom, since you moved into this building and looked at me like I was the last person on earth you wanted to see, since you shared your Chinese food in a broken elevator and laughed at my terrible jokes. Phoebe's heart was racing so fast she thought it might explode. You can't say things like that. Why not? It's true. He smiled, and it was the most genuine expression she'd ever seen on his face. I love how you get this little wrinkle between your eyebrows when you're concentrating. I love that you pretend not to care when I touch your hair, but you always lean into it just slightly. I love that you're brilliant and fierce and kind, even when you're trying to be intimidating. Stop, she whispered, but she didn't mean it. I love that you wore mismatched shoes today because you were too upset to notice. I love that you came here tonight even though you were scared. I love... She kissed him. Not the desperate kiss from Boston, but something softer, slower, a promise instead of a question. Brian made a sound low in his throat, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her closer as he deepened the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Phoebe rested her forehead against his. I love you too, she said. I'm terrified and it's completely impractical and probably a disaster waiting to happen, but I love you. Brian's smile was brilliant. Yeah? She kissed him again, quick and sweet. But we're waiting. 4 months until the contract ends. We do this right. 4 months of torture, you mean? 4 months of anticipation. She pulled back slightly. We can date, have dinners, see movies, talk for hours. But we keep it quiet, professional at the office. Secret dating? Brian's eyes sparkled with mischief. That's kind of hot. You would think that. Sneaking around, stolen kisses in empty conference rooms, meaningful looks across boardroom tables. Brian Holloway, are you romanticizing workplace impropriety? Absolutely. He kissed her nose. Is it working? Despite herself, Phoebe laughed. Maybe a little. They settled on the couch, Phoebe tucked against Brian's side, his arm around her shoulders. It felt natural, right, like coming home. Tell me something, Brian said, playing with her hair the way he always did. When did you know? Know what? That you loved me. When did you realize? Phoebe thought about it. The elevator. When you shared my Chinese food and made me laugh. I think I knew then, but I wasn't ready to admit it. She tilted her head to look at him. You? The bathroom 2 years ago. At her surprised expression, he grinned. You were so righteously angry, so completely unimpressed by me. It was refreshing, terrifying, but refreshing. I called you a privileged man-child. You did. It was very hot. You're insane. About you? Absolutely. He kissed her temple. 4 months, huh? 4 months. I can do 4 months. His hand traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. As long as I get to do this. Hold you. Talk to you. Be with you. You do. Phoebe snuggled closer. But eventually I need to go back to my apartment. I have work in the morning. Or, Brian said hopefully, you could stay. We could work on the puzzle. Order actual good Chinese food. Fall asleep on this very comfortable couch. Just sleep? Just sleep. I promised we'd wait, and I keep my promises. He squeezed her shoulder. But I'd really like to wake up with you here. Even if it's just for tonight. Phoebe should say no. Should maintain boundaries. Keep some distance. Okay, she heard herself say instead. But I get the left side of the couch. I'm very particular about my sleeping arrangements. Brian's laugh rumbled through his chest. Deal, counselor. They ordered Chinese food from Zequan Palace, worked on his puzzle, and talked until the early hours of the morning. And when they finally fell asleep, tangled together on his couch, Phoebe thought that maybe, just maybe, letting herself fall was the best decision she'd ever made. Secret dating, Phoebe discovered, was significantly harder than it sounded. Stop looking at me like that, she hissed across the conference table, where Brian was supposed to be reviewing compliance documents, not staring at her with that soft expression that made her heart melt. Like what? He didn't even try to look innocent. Like you're thinking about last night. I am thinking about last night. You snore, by the way. It's adorable. I do not snore. James Peterson looked up from his laptop. Everything all right? Fine, Phoebe said quickly. Just a disagreement about contract interpretation. A heated disagreement, Brian added, his eyes dancing. Ms. Dalton has very strong opinions about subsection C. I have strong opinions about many things, Phoebe said meaningfully. I've noticed. After the meeting, Marina cornered her in the hallway. Okay, what's going on? You two are acting weird. We're not acting weird. Honey, he smiled at you 17 times during that meeting, I counted, and you keep touching your hair, which you only do when you're nervous or... Marina's eyes went wide. Oh my God. Something happened in Boston. Nothing happened in Boston. You're sleeping with him. Marina. Phoebe dragged her into an empty office, closing the door. Keep your voice down. I knew it. I knew something was different. You're glowing. You never glow. Marina grabbed her hands. Tell me everything. When? How? Was it good? Of course it was good. Look at him. We're not sleeping together. But something happened. Phoebe sighed. We're dating. Kind of. Secretly. Until the contract ends. Marina's squeal could probably be heard in Connecticut. She pulled Phoebe into a crushing hug. Finally, I've been watching you two dance around each other for months. We need to keep it quiet. I'm a vault, silent as the grave. You can trust me. Marina's expression turned serious. I'm happy for you, honey. Really happy. He's good for you. How do you know? Because you're smiling. Really smiling. I haven't seen you this happy in years." That evening, Phoebe let herself into Brian's penthouse using the key he'd given her that morning. She found him in the kitchen attempting to cook something that involved a lot of smoke and creative cursing. "What are you doing?" she asked, waving away the smoke. "Making dinner." Brian looked up from the stove, his hair disheveled, and an apron that said "Kiss the Cook" stretched across his chest. Or attempting to. The recipe said it was easy. The recipe lied. Phoebe peered at the pan. "Is that supposed to be chicken?" "In theory. In practice, I think it's charcoal." He turned off the burner, looking sheepish. "I wanted to do something nice. Cook you dinner, be romantic. Instead, I've probably triggered the smoke alarms in 3 apartments." Phoebe's heart melted. "Have you tried to cook for me?" "Unsuccessfully, but yes." He pulled off the apron. "I should have ordered Chinese." "No, this is—" She stepped into his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "This is really sweet. Terrible, but sweet. I have many talents. Cooking is not one of them. Good thing I have other reasons to keep you around." "Oh? Like what?" "You're excellent at kissing, for one." She kissed him again, longer this time. "You give good hugs. You smell nice. You have a very comfortable couch." "I'm more than my couch," Brian protested, even as he pulled her closer. "Debatable." She laughed at his offended expression. "I'm kidding. You're also pretty good at puzzles." "Pretty good. I finished the entire coastline section last night, only because I helped." They ordered pizza and spent the evening on that very comfortable couch, Phoebe's head in Brian's lap while he played with her hair, and they watched terrible reality TV. "This is nice," Brian said during a commercial. "Just being together, no pressure, no pretense." Phoebe was drowsy, content in a way she'd never been. "We should tell people soon, after the contract." "About that?" Brian's hand stilled in her hair. "I talked to the board yesterday. We're ahead of schedule. If we maintain this pace, we could have everything wrapped up in 6 weeks instead of 4 months. Phoebe sat up, suddenly wide awake. 6 weeks? Is that good? Bad? Your face is doing something complicated. It's good, really good." She kissed him, pouring into it all the feelings she couldn't quite articulate. "It means we don't have to hide as long." "It also means," Brian murmured against her lips, "that I can take you to the charity gala next month, as my date officially. The same gala where I caught you in the bathroom 2 years ago. Poetic, right? Full circle. Except this time, I'll be with the right woman." His expression turned serious. "I want to show you off, Phoebe. Want everyone to know you're mine." "Possessive much? About you?" "Extremely." He pulled her back down into his arms. "Fair warning, I'm going to be insufferable about it. I'll probably tell everyone within a 5-mile radius that I'm the luckiest man alive." "You are insufferable. You love it." "I love you," she corrected. "The insufferable part just comes with the package." Brian's smile was brilliant. "Best package deal ever." They fell asleep there again, tangled together, and Phoebe thought that secret dating might be hard, but being with Brian was the easiest thing she'd ever done. 6 weeks later, Phoebe stood in front of her mirror, smoothing down her emerald green dress for the 10th time. The contract had been finalized that morning, signed by all parties, officially complete. Tonight, at the charity gala, she and Brian would go public. "Stop fidgeting," Marina said from her position on the bed. "You look stunning. He's going to lose his mind. What if people think that you're a brilliant attorney who happens to be dating an equally brilliant banker? Good. Let them think that." Marina stood, adjusting Phoebe's necklace. "You earned your success. Nobody can take that from you." The doorbell rang. Marina squealed. "That's him! I'm going to hide in your bedroom and spy through the peephole." "You're supposed to be my adult friend, not a teenager." "I can be both." Phoebe opened the door to find Brian in a tuxedo, holding a bouquet of peonies, her favorite, though she'd never told him. "How did you know?" she asked, taking the flowers. "I pay attention." His eyes traveled over her, and his expression was reverent. "Phoebe, you're... wow. Eloquent. You've stolen all my words." He stepped closer, his hands settling on her waist. "Is this the dress you wore 2 years ago, at the gala where we met? You remember what I wore?" "I remember everything about that night." He kissed her softly. "Ready to scandalize society?" From the bedroom came Marina's muffled voice. "Get a room. Also, you look adorable together. Brian laughed. Is she watching us? Probably recording it too. Smart woman. The gala was exactly as Phoebe remembered. Too many people, too much champagne, and an orchestra playing in the corner. But this time, she walked in on Brian's arm, his hand possessive on her lower back. Everyone's staring, she whispered. Let them. Brian pressed a kiss to her temple. You're the most beautiful woman here. They should stare. Victoria Chen was the first to approach, her smile knowing. So it wasn't just colleagues after all. No, Brian said simply. This is my girlfriend. The word sent a thrill through Phoebe. Girlfriend, official, real. I knew it, Victoria laughed. The way you two looked at each other in Boston. I told Sarah from accounting that there was definitely something there. You gossip? Brian looked betrayed. Everyone gossips, Brian. Welcome to office politics. Victoria winked at Phoebe. He's a good one. High maintenance, but good. I am not high maintenance. You once sent back coffee 4 times because it wasn't the right temperature, Phoebe pointed out. That's just having standards. As Victoria walked away, laughing, Raymond Holloway materialized beside them, looking pleased as punch. Well, well, my son finally did something right. He shook Phoebe's hand warmly. Miss Dalton, welcome to the family chaos. Fair warning, we're all terrible at expressing emotions and excellent at making inappropriate jokes at dinner. Dad, Brian warned. What, I'm being welcoming? Raymond's expression softened. But seriously, my dear, I'm glad he finally got his head out of his... Dad! His clouds. I was going to say clouds. Raymond's eyes twinkled. Have a wonderful evening, you two. Try not to scandalize the donors too much. As the night progressed, Phoebe relaxed. People congratulated them, made jokes about office romances, but nobody questioned her professionalism. Nobody suggested she'd slept her way to success. See, Brian murmured during a slow dance, everything's fine. You were right. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I want to savor the moment. She stepped on his foot, gently. Don't push it. Pushing it is my specialty. He spun her, pulling her back against his chest. Dance with me forever. That's very dramatic. I'm a dramatic person. His lips brushed her ear. Want to get out of here? Phoebe's heart stuttered. The gala isn't over. We've made our appearance, fulfilled our social obligations. His hand traced her spine. And I really, really want to be alone with you. The heat in his voice made her shiver. Okay. They made their excuses, slipping out into the cool night air. In the car, Brian kept one hand on her knee, his thumb tracing patterns that made concentration impossible. Nervous? He asked. Should I be? God, I hope not. He glanced at her, his expression vulnerable. I've been thinking about this for 6 weeks, months really, but I want it to be right, want you to be sure. I'm sure. Phoebe covered his hand with hers. I've never been more sure of anything. At his penthouse, Brian led her inside, then just held her for a long moment. I love you, he said quietly. I need you to know that before anything else. This isn't just physical for me. I know. She rose on her toes, kissing him with all the emotion she'd been holding back for weeks. I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes. Good scared or bad scared? Good scared. The kind that means it matters. Brian kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands cupping her face with a tenderness that made her eyes sting. When he pulled back, his expression was intense. Last chance to change your mind, he said. Not a chance. He smiled, brilliant and relieved, and led her toward his bedroom. Then let me show you exactly how much I love you. And he did. Brian's bedroom was softly lit, warm and inviting. He undressed her slowly, reverently, his hands trembling slightly as he lowered the zipper of her dress. You're shaking, Phoebe whispered. I'm nervous. He laughed softly. Ridiculous, isn't it? I've wanted this for so long, and now that it's happening, I'm terrified of messing it up. She cupped his face, making him look at her. You won't. He kissed her palms, her wrists, the inside of her elbows, mapping her skin like territory he wanted to memorize. When her dress pulled at her feet, he stepped back, his eyes drinking her in with such raw appreciation that she felt beautiful, desired, cherished. You're perfect, he breathed. Absolutely perfect. I'm not. To me, you are. He shrugged off his jacket, his bow tie, each piece of clothing revealing more of the strong, muscular body she'd only imagined. Every curve, every line. Perfect! He laid her on the bed with infinite care, his body covering hers as he kissed her deeply. His hands explored slowly, learning what made her gasp, what made her arch into his touch. When he kissed a trail down her neck, her collarbone, the valley between her breasts, she felt worshipped. "Brian," she whispered, her fingers tangling in his hair. "I'm here." He looked up at her, his eyes dark with love and desire. "I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." When they finally joined, it was slow and tender. Brian's forehead pressed against hers, their breath mingling as they moved together. He murmured words of love against her skin. How beautiful she was, how long he'd wanted this, how right it felt to be with her. Phoebe had never felt so connected to another person. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a declaration. When pleasure built between them, cresting in waves that left them both breathless, she cried tears of joy against his shoulder. Afterward, Brian held her close, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back, pressing kisses to her hair. "Worth the wait?" he asked softly. "So worth it." She tilted her head to look at him, seeing her own emotions reflected in his eyes. "I love you. I love you more. That's mathematically impossible. Then I love you infinitely." He kissed her nose. "Better?" "Getting there." They fell asleep tangled together, and when Phoebe woke in the early morning light, Brian was watching her with that soft expression that made her heart melt. "Creepy," she mumbled. "Can't help it. You're beautiful when you sleep." He pulled her closer. "Even when you snore?" "I do not." She stopped at his grin. "You're going to hold that over me forever, aren't you?" "Absolutely. It's in the boyfriend contract." "There's a boyfriend contract?" "There is now. Section 1. I get to tease you about snoring. Section 2. You have to let me make you breakfast even though I can't cook. Section 3. We do this every morning for the rest of our lives." Phoebe's breath caught. "That's a very long contract." "I'm hoping it's permanent." Brian's expression turned serious. "I know it's early. We've only been officially together for 6 weeks. But Phoebe, I've known for 2 years that you were it for me, the one I'd been waiting for." "Brian, I'm not proposing, not yet." He kissed her softly. "But I'm letting you know my intentions. I want the whole thing. Marriage, kids, growing old together while we bicker about whose turn it is to make the terrible coffee." Tears pricked Phoebe's eyes. "I want that too." "Yeah?" "Yeah." She kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it. "All of it. With you." 6 months later, Marina burst into Phoebe's office without knocking. "He's going to propose tonight." Phoebe looked up from her paperwork. "What?" "Brian, he came to the office yesterday asking your father for permission. Very traditional. It was adorable." Marina was practically vibrating. "Richard said yes, obviously. He loves Brian. We all love Brian." "Marina, you can't just—" "He bought a ring. Platinum band, vintage setting. I may have accidentally seen it when I was definitely not snooping in Raymond's office." Marina sat on Phoebe's desk. "Are you ready for this?" Was she? Phoebe thought about the past 6 months, waking up next to Brian every morning, their terrible cooking attempts, lazy Sundays working on puzzles, the way he still touched her hair every chance he got, the way he made her laugh even on her worst days, the way he looked at her like she hung the moon. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." That night, Brian took her to the roof of their building. He'd set up candles, champagne, and a blanket under the stars. "This is beautiful," Phoebe breathed. "Not as beautiful as you." He took her hand, his palms sweaty. Nervous, she realized. Brian Holloway, confident banker, was nervous. "Phoebe, I had this whole speech planned. Something eloquent about how you changed my life, made me a better man, gave me purpose. But all I can think is that I want to be your person forever. I want to wake up to your snoring." "I don't snore." "And your terrible coffee, and your brilliant legal mind." He dropped to one knee, pulling out a velvet box. "I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, annoying you, and being impossibly grateful that you gave an arrogant banker a chance. Phoebe Dalton, will you marry me?" The ring was perfect. Vintage, elegant, exactly her style. Through tears, Phoebe laughed. "You really asked my father first?" "I'm old-fashioned." His voice shook slightly. "Is that a yes?" Yes. She pulled him up, kissing him deeply. Yes, yes, yes. Brian slipped the ring on her finger and she realized something. 2 years ago, she'd found him insufferable. 1 year ago, she'd called him chaos personified. Now, he was simply home. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I love you more, he replied, and kissed her under the stars, right there on the roof where their impossible, perfect story had begun. And in a broken elevator, in late-night work sessions, in shared Chinese food and terrible coffee, they'd found something neither had been looking for, a love worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth everything. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.